Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Unexplained, Real-Life Supernatural Stories for Uncertain Times by Richard Maclean Smith. Narrated by Bruce Mann. Introduction. It's the evening of December the 4th, 1944, and at roughly 30,000 feet above the border of Holland and Germany, 12 RAF Mosquito aircraft are leading a raid on the industrial harbour town of Karlsruhe. A short distance behind them, somewhere in the clouds below, more than 500 RAF bombers are heading in the same direction. The Mosquitoes form part of a unit known as the Pathfinders, whose job it is to fly at the head of a raid in order to mark the targets for a more effective run. They do this by dropping a variety of multicolored flares, small pockets of light that float down onto the target below. One can only imagine the sight from the ground, watching as these soft-falling, colorful fireworks materialize out of the dark as if from nowhere, a weirdly beautiful precursor to the horror that would shortly follow. On this night, inside the cockpit of Mosquito O Oboe, Captain Johnny Little holds the plane steady as he stares straight ahead into the night sky, while his navigator, Albert Smith, diligently plots a steady line toward their target under the dim green glow of the instrument panel. For many of us, it is impossible to imagine the heightened sense of fear and anxiety that Johnny and Albert would have felt as they drew nearer to their target destination, a familiar feeling for them both, especially Albert, who was undertaking his 90th mission of the war. But even for a crew as battle-hardened as they were, one suspects it is something they never got used to. "Alter course to 164 degrees, Albert says through his oxygen mask. "Okay," comes back the nasal reply. Suddenly, there is a jolt. Albert turns sharply to the left. Looking out the window, he sees something in the darkness, something that shouldn't be there. The black underbelly of another Mosquito aircraft. He can only watch in horror as the other plane plows right through their tail. There is a strange moment of calm as the drone of the engine continues, and the plane seems to hold. But then comes a sickening, shuddering lurch as the aircraft starts to turn in on itself. And now they are plummeting helplessly toward the ground. Albert screams as he is thrown forward, wrenched into the air, and thumped to the floor of the plane. He grabs for the struts at the base of Johnny's seat as his legs twist above him and urine flows uncontrollably. Shifting to lift his head against the force of gravity, Albert can just make out Johnny wrestling with the joystick. But without the tail of the plane it is utterly futile, and the aircraft starts to spin violently out of control. Johnny reaches up for the handle of the escape hatch and pulls down hard. In an instant, the warmth of the cockpit is replaced by the rush of bitterly cold air. With the parachute already on his back, Johnny grabs hold of the joystick and unlocks his seatbelt. Immediately, he is sucked toward the opening above. As he struggles to keep himself inside the plane, he tries desperately to reach out to Albert. For a moment, he seems to hang in the air like a balloon being held by a child just before they let it go. And then he is gone into the darkness beyond. Albert, now alone, with his legs still twisting above him, spots his parachute at the back of the cockpit, strapped to the side. But if he lets go and attempts to reach it, he'll be sucked straight out of the plane. In that moment, in the chaotic vortex of the spinning aircraft, Albert realizes he is going to die. As the plane continues to fall, he pulls his head hard against the floor and closes his eyes. It will be quicker this way, he thinks, and the thought of being sucked out into the darkness beyond terrifies him even more. Then something flickers across his eyelids. He opens them to find a soft orange glow all around the cockpit. The engine is now on fire. "Please, God, let it come before I burn," he begs. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, his legs fall to the floor. It takes him a second to understand, but as Albert lifts his head, he realizes the plane is no longer spinning. What's more, he's been thrown right next to his parachute. In seconds, he rips the chute from the side and, despite his trembling fingers, clips it to his harness before somehow managing to stand. Above, he sees only the darkness, the stuff of nightmares just a moment before, but now his only hope. He reaches for it, but something pulls him back into the plane. This can't be happening. Then he realizes it's his helmet, still connected to the intercom cable. He rips it off and hauls himself up, pushing his head above the cockpit. But as the freezing wind lashes at his face and he tries to kick off, his feet refuse to leave the floor. Finally, with one last desperate push, he is thrust into the air. And now he is falling alone in the pitch-black sky. On the ground, pilot Johnny Liddell, after successfully bailing out of the aircraft, watches as the burning plane hits the deck. There is no sign of his navigator Albert in the sky above. 2 days later, at the home of Albert's parents, Albert Sr. and Alice Smith, there is a dreaded knock at the door. It's the mailman, bearing news that no parent wants to hear. As Albert Sr. reads the telegram out loud, Alice struggles to contain herself. Although it isn't definitive, such telegrams rarely turn out well. The couple try to maintain hope, but it's hard to escape the creeping sense that their son would never be coming home. So it's with some surprise when they receive another telegram only a few days later. But this time it isn't from the War Office, it's from their son. He is alive and recuperating well in the hospital. A few weeks later, he finally returns home. Although by no means unique for a time of war, it is nonetheless an incredible story, and one I know particularly well, because Albert was, in fact, my granddad. As you can imagine, it is a story that has been shared many times among the family. My granddad even went as far as to record his account of the incident in a book. I say it is a story I know well, but it was only very recently that I discovered a piece of it is missing. Missing from the book, and missing from every account of this story I have heard since I was a child. A couple of years ago, when my dad was telling it again, he added something new. Shortly before the plane stopped spinning, for a brief moment, Albert saw a vision of an old woman he didn't recognize in the cockpit with him. When I asked why I'd never heard that part before, my dad explained that Albert had dismissed it as just a figment of his imagination. In the retelling of the story, this peculiar moment had gradually been erased, because to include it meant opening the door to unwanted superstition. To be fair, this is my thinking too. It certainly adds a little more color, not that the story needs any more embellishment, but as my granddad had, I dismissed the vision of the elderly woman as nothing but a trick of the mind. Then I found out something else. When Albert's mother received the news that her son was likely to have been killed in action, she was devastated. However, being Catholic, she retained the hope that he might be in a better place. Seeking comfort, she paid a visit to a local medium. Perhaps she went with the genuine intention of trying to contact Albert from beyond the grave, or perhaps it was just her way of saying goodbye to her son. When Alice entered the room, the medium knew immediately why she was there. Of course, it wouldn't take much to work out why a distraught middle-aged woman during the height of the Second World War would be paying a visit to a medium, and ordinarily you might expect the medium to commiserate with the grief-stricken Alice and offer herself as a conduit to contact her recently deceased son. Only she didn't. Instead, what she said was, "You needn't worry. Your son is not dead, and he is being looked after by a deceased relative." Although the story about my granddad is relatively benign, for many, tales of strange and unexplained events of the supposed paranormal or supernatural will always hold a unique and often dark fascination. Not only do we enjoy reveling in the mystery, but we are also fascinated by the questions that such stories consistently throw up. Questions about our nature and the nature of the universe, perhaps even universes around us. Writing this book, I began to think about when it was that my own fascination with such stories began. Much to my regret, I wasn't a voracious reader growing up. Maybe it was laziness or lack of imagination, but for me, the TV was my window of escape. Books seemed unwelcoming and aloof, quietly arranged in endless rows with their backs turned to me. They felt somehow inaccessible, requiring a guide or interpreter, some frame of reference to send me on my way, or the bravery to just take the plunge. And music, in some ways, felt much the same. I would eventually find my way to both, but with TV there was no such reticence. It didn't require me to awaken its words or instinctively know where to look. It was already alive, waiting for me. Everyone knew that, by day, TV was a succubus, a terminal parasite of regimented programming and strange, unnaturally enthused behavior. Today, daytime TV is characterized by the loud, brash brightness of a world that feels all too hyper-real. Growing up in the 80s and early 90s, it was a vat of extreme normality by comparison, pastel in palette and populated with normal people, rendered strangely artificial and Stepfordian in their ordinariness by the cameras. It looks unutterably creepy when watched back now, but to a child at the time it was just plain boring. But come night-time, to this child at least, TV was a wholly different animal. It was a wild, untamed thing, a place of unimagined topographies and nether worlds, a dangerous place. Being the spoiled child that I was, at some point I had convinced my parents to put a TV in my room, no doubt under a strict agreement of rationed hours that I had no intention of adhering to. So, at night, while the rest of the house was sound asleep, I switched it on. What greeted me was a strange and alien world, a world of unrestrained pop culture, foreign voices, and, if I was really lucky, movie-drome. Presented by the riveting Alex Cox and later Mark Cousins, the weekly BBC Two series showcased an extraordinary program of obscure cult films that offered up a world more real than anything I had known before. Moviedrome changed everything. From that moment on, I would often lie awake in the dark as shapes and sounds emerged from behind the glass and crept into my room. Things I couldn't possibly understand, but that seemed oddly familiar at the same time. This wasn't the nightmare vision of Cronenberg's Videodrome or the infinite jest of Foster Wallace, however. I wasn't one of George Romero's zombies slavishly hooked to the screen. I was the active participant. It was as if something deep inside had been roused from slumber, something primal and ancient, an old one. And patterns would soon emerge, for it was in this fertile place between sleep and the screen, as I watched my dreams play out, or was it those images I would later dream, that an appetite for the dark, weird, and eerie began to grow, or rather awaken. Moviedrome was the first gateway to the viscera of horror and science fiction that I fell in love with. Films like Assault on Precinct 13, Solaris, Manhunter, The Fly, and Society were mind-blowing. These strange worlds would also be found elsewhere, but somehow I uncovered them all. Blade Runner, Suspiria, Blue Velvet, Hellraiser, They Live, La Planète Sauvage, Don't Look Now. There would be many others, but it was the ones with the dark, surreal qualities that left the deepest impression. And, among them all, one, first broadcast in the UK at 9 p.m. on October the 23rd, 1990, permeated the deepest. A peculiar offbeat soap opera, soon to become the cultural phenomenon Twin Peaks. Age and experience would inevitably broaden my interests, bring a taste for nuance and subtlety. And yet, so much of what fascinates me now is rooted in these first films and TV shows. And of course, in time, I would discover they had deep, timeless roots of their own. As the cultural theorist Mark Fisher explained, the allure of the strange and the eerie has to do with a fascination for the outside, for that which lies beyond standard perception, cognition, and experience. This, of course, can refer to the mundane as well as the fantastical, but it is perhaps no more explicit than in our fascination with the potential for the supernatural and paranormal, or the familiar otherness of dystopian science fiction. Simply, these films that I was watching, aside from being the most brilliant stories, were grappling with some of the biggest questions. On the metaphysical and spiritual, for want of a better word, sides, my interest in these ideas begins with my fear of death and the existential crisis of cosmic insignificance. What draws me in is the tiny sliver of hope that somewhere in it all there will be something to convince me I need not fear the great, infinite abyss. But conversely, since anything a bit more complicated was beyond me as a child, often the intrigue wasn't so much metaphysical or spiritual, but rather the horrors of cold, material reality, whatever reality was supposed to be. As an atheist and rationalist, I've always been fascinated by the human imagination, the power of the subconscious, and the nature of reality. Which is to say, the very basic, tangible fact that the world we see through the confines of our limited senses and our subjective social constructions and prejudices is in many ways not real, merely our own unique interpretation of it. It is this idea, explored through stories of the mysterious and the unexplained, that I find most invigorating. Human concerns over the discrepancies between the worlds we experience and the world as it truly is are not novel by any stretch. We only have to look at the work of Parmenides or Plato's better-known cave allegory to reveal an ancient fascination with this ontological conundrum. But in recent times, we have witnessed an explosion of science and pop science books exploring these ideas. From physicist Carlo Rovelli's Reality is Not What It Seems, and cosmologist Max Tegmark's Our Mathematical Universe, My Quest for the Ultimate Nature of Reality, to the phenomenal success of books exploring counterintuitive thought, such as Malcolm Gladwell's Blink or Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner's Freakonomics. All reveal to us hidden worlds beyond what we think we know. You might say we are, for better or worse, the children of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and postmodernist theory, uncovering a world where reality seems an ever-changing, many-splintered thing, a place where nothing is certain, not even immutable laws of physics. It is the arrogant preserve of every generation to think, as Max Tegmark puts it, that everything we know about is everything that exists. Yet time and time again we are proven wrong. And as we continue to peer ever farther into the far reaches of space, we see the universe enlarging as our own sense of place within it diminishes. Where once we considered Earth the center of the solar system, with the sun revolving around it, it may transpire that the universe we live in is not even the only universe. And if we reject our solipsistic fallacies and accept there are likely other equally intelligent species out there, perhaps evolved differently from ourselves, who see the universe differently from us, it begs the question, what is it exactly that we are perceiving? Which is not to reject truth or denigrate science or deny what we have discovered, but to wonder at what still remains to be found out. How naive might our current perspectives look from the vantage point of 5,000 years from now, or 5,000 million years from now? Because if there's one thing we can be certain of, they will change. In my lifetime alone, we have come to understand brain functions and the mechanism of genes in ways that could render any notion of free will redundant. Some of our finest minds have begun to question whether time, as we traditionally understand it, exists in any quantifiable way at all. The weirdness of quantum mechanics has led to predictions of an infinity of universes parallel to ours, in turn implying the possibility that everything that could ever happen not only will happen, but actually already has. Animals with which we share this extraordinary planet, much to our shame, are increasingly being revealed to be far more sophisticated and conscious than we once ever thought possible. And all the while, the slow etherealization of our lives into the digital sphere could be leading to the obsolescence of the physical form, if it hasn't already been done by the computer simulation we may be living in. It is little wonder, then, that stories of the strange, supernatural, and paranormal should be so alluring. Stories that question the limits of our knowledge, consciousness, and reality. Stories that play out in the places between what we think of as real and what is not. Such stories, by definition, regardless of their veracity, serve as vital expressions of what intrigues and scares us, but most of all of what is unknown. And what makes the unexplained mystery different to the classic story structure of a Hollywood film is that it leaves us without closure, without the why. It is this element that is so seductive, because, as a species, despite nature's best efforts to instruct us otherwise, we have a biological compulsion to find meaning. In 1994, social psychologist Eri Kruglansky coined the phrase cognitive closure, defining it as individuals' desire for a firm answer to a question and an aversion toward ambiguity. It is no coincidence, then, that horror stories and stories of mystery are often synonymous with the dark, a symbol for the unknown. It is a clumsy reference, perhaps, but for my granddad, even when he was falling from the sky in a burning plane, certain that he was going to die, there was something about being sucked into the unknowable space beyond that terrified him even more. And, in a sense, we are right to be afraid of the dark, the unknown. It is a basic, primal reaction fundamental to our survival. In 2016, researchers from Brown University discovered that even when we are sleeping, parts of our brains remain vigilant, looking out for potential threats. But there is an important reason not to fear the dark. In his analysis of the archetypal story, Christopher Vogler, expanding on the work of mythologist Joseph Campbell, writes of a moment known as the approach to the inmost cave. Fans of the Star Wars series might recognize it as the moment where Yoda tells Luke he must literally enter the cave to face his fears. But crucially, it is not the fear of the other that scares him, but what his fear of the other will reveal about himself. Only when the hero, which is you, comes to terms with this, will he be able to slay the dragon and emerge complete. There may come a day, years from now, when all the many, many stars in our universe have flickered their last. And before that, as space continues to expand, light from even the closest galaxies will no longer be visible from Earth, as one by one all the stars will go out. This is the dark that truly terrifies me, the dark from which there is no coming back. People often say we live in uncertain times, but they have always been uncertain. We are, in a sense, always careering into the unknown, with no idea about where things will take us, or what we truly know, or, indeed, to what extent we can really know anything. This is why it is as important as it has ever been that we don't retreat from the dark of the unknown, but instead embrace it while we still have the light to which we can return. So, what better way to explore all this than through the unexplained mystery? Stories of bizarre and improbable events that test our fundamental beliefs and continue to evade our human need to understand and rationalize. In the sections that follow, I have put together some of my favorite dark, strange, and unsettling unexplained mysteries to get us on our way. So, without further ado, let's take a step into the unknown. Resurrected dreams. She herself is a haunted house. She does not possess herself. Her ancestors sometimes come and peer out of the windows of her eyes, and that is very frightening. Angela Carter, the Lady of the House of Love. It could be argued that our ability to comprehend our own deaths, and the fear of such an idea, is the very thing that makes us the conscious, self-aware creatures that we consider ourselves to be, that only in understanding our lives as something in opposition to death do we develop a concept of the self. You might say that death is the ultimate price of self-awareness. The idea of death as a final end for us and the ones we love remains the greatest of fears, despite the extent to which humans believe in an afterlife in one form or another. A 2011 poll conducted by Ipsos Social Research Institute, involving 18,000 people across 23 countries, found that 51% of participants believed in an afterlife. We need only witness the ferocity with which people will instinctively fight for their survival to understand how potent this fear can be.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?